Thank you, Ken. I hope you can see my screen.
Yeah.
Yes.
I would like to start with a question or a couple of questions. And sorry that I pick on you. Philip, do you have any relatives in Ukraine?
I do not.
Yolanda, would you be able to name 3 countries that border Ukraine?
Russia. I know I have seen the map, but I don't remember. But I know Russia is definitely next to Ukraine. Oh, sorry. Poland is another one. And I don't remember. At least 2 or 3.
Yeah, there are in fact several countries. The point I'm trying to make is that I have family there. Although I'm half Russian, I'm also half Ukrainian. I've been there multiple times, so Ukraine matters to me greatly. But the question I want to try to answer today is, should it matter to you? Should it matter to Philip, to Yolanda, to the rest of you, to an average American? Or is it some war far, far away in some land that nobody can even really point on the map where the heck it is? Is it some territorial dispute that America should stay out of? So I want to look at these questions and try to answer them through the lens of the participants, the different participants in this war. I want to discuss how the war should end and what can you do to help Ukraine. First, I want to look at it from the perspective of Russia. The war has started, the full-scale invasion, in February of last year. Putin went on TV and said this to the country and to the world. Here are the goals, what he was calling and still calling, of the special military operation. I have decided to start the special military operation in Ukraine with the following goals: demilitarization, denazification of Ukraine, protection of ethnic Russians, and prevention of the Ukrainian membership in NATO, keeping it under the Russian influence. That's what he declared. But what that really means, denazification, for example, he says, and his propaganda has been saying for 8 years, that Ukrainians are Nazis. They are governed by a Nazi regime, which is funny because it's democratic and the leaders are changing, but nevertheless, Russians hear that every single day. And he also said that Ukraine is not a state, Ukrainians are not a nation. The goal is really to conquer and absorb the Ukraine and you eliminate Ukrainians as a nation. He says they're really Russians. Anybody who opposes it, they basically eliminate one way or the other. He also said several times that he wants to revive Soviet Union. He said that Soviet Union collapse was the biggest mistake of last century. In his view, that's what he really believes. And he wants to reestablish Russia as the 3 key players on the world geopolitical stage. Really, he thinks that there are 3 main countries in this world, US, China, and Russia. Russia was unfairly disregarded by the US mainly, and he wants to get it back. The other countries are all subordinate. He truly believes Zelensky is subordinate of Biden, for example. He believes that the President Biden can call Zelensky and order him to end the war, or to start the war, or to capitulate, or whatever he wants him to do. He lives in a world of illusions. And really what he wants to do is to replace the international law, which is rule-based, with the law of the strongest. I have nuclear weapons, I can attack any country, I can conquer it, and you will do nothing to me because I will throw a nuke on you. This is what General Scott Berrier said, the director of the Defense Intelligence Agency of the United States, and Errol Haynes last year at a gathering of the National Intelligence. They said this: the invasion has demonstrated Russia's intent to overturn the US-led, rules-based, post-Cold War international order, expand its control over the former Soviet Union, and reclaim what it regards as its rightful position on the world stage. By the way, not once, but many times, the propaganda of Russian Federation and its politicians, Putin included and others, say they fight with NATO. You think they fight with Ukraine? Well, they are convinced they're fighting with NATO, that there are NATO soldiers on the ground in Ukraine fighting. Sergei Lavrov, the top diplomat of Russia, last year in Indonesia on the international gathering said this: the West has started this war. They attacked Russia, and Russia is trying and doing its hardest to defend ourselves against the Western attack. When he said that, the audience there laughed and started leaving. This is what they say since the beginning of this war from Russian TV. Really, why Putin really decided to start this war? He was overconfident. He thought he will conquer Ukraine in 3 days, and he will continue to expand into ex-Soviet bloc and other countries that were ex-USSR and other Western bloc countries. And really, it is about staying in power. That's what one of the politologists think about Kalyamov. He is the ex-speechwriter of Putin, actually, but now lives in Israel and is one of the opposition members. Staying in power is really what it is about. Projecting internal issues outward with this aggression keeps Putin in power. He will stay in power as long as this war goes. When it stops, it's a big question if he can retain his power. Let's take a look at the Europe, US, and NATO in general. This is what Kurt Volker says, former special US envoy to Ukraine and former US ambassador to NATO. Ukraine really does NATO's job for it. It defending Europe from Eastern threat. NATO was formed in 1949, and it was formed to protect the rest of the Western countries from the spreading communist threat. Right after the end of World War II, Soviet Union started to install pro-communist, pro-Soviet Union governments into what became later a Soviet bloc. Poland, Hungary, Romania, Czechoslovakia, now it's Czechia and Slovakia, and so forth. NATO was formed to prevent further spread to the West of that trend. If Ukraine will fall, and this again, not once, but many times from the Russian TV sounded, Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia are next. And they know that, that's why they help the most Ukraine, according to percentage of their GDP. And that's what Nikki Haley also said in her presidential debates last month with Vivek Ramaswamy. And this is what Jens Stoltenberg said, the Secretary General of NATO. We're all paying a price for Russia's war against Ukraine, but the price we pay is in money, while the price Ukraine pays is in blood. NATO will stand with Ukraine for as long as it takes. If we let Putin win, all of us will pay a much higher price for many years to come. And this is what Nikki Haley also says. Really, according to the intelligence chiefs of the United States, China and Russia are some of the biggest threats to the US at the moment. Using just 3.5% of US military budget, US deters both Russia and China from any aggressive actions further in the West or in the Indo-Pacific Ocean. And actually 11 countries spend more in percentage points comparing to their GDP than US, although in dollars, US of course spends the most, but it's also is one of the richest countries of the world. American prosperity depends directly on prosperity in Europe because Europe and US remain each other's highest, biggest trade and investment partners. Up to 25% of goods and services are coming to the US from EU and vice versa. So Ukraine does NATO's job and America has direct dependence on the prosperity of Europe. Therefore, it needs to secure the Europe's prosperity and national security. Let's take a look at this war from the perspective of China. This is what Ben Hodges said. The general, he's retired now. He served as a commanding general United States Army Europe 2014 to 17. So he was a NATO's general, and he comments about this war quite a lot. US-China tensions are growing over Taiwan and over the US sanctions that Trump installed when he was the president, made China angry. And when we say that our values are respect for sovereignty, freedom of navigation, human rights, international law, we must demonstrate that we're able to protect these values. If we say in the Indo-Pacific region that we are ready to defend these values, Chinese are not going to believe us. Why would we defend it there if we didn't here? Although China's economy depends heavily on the Europe and US, up to 70% of exports go to these two regions, the decisions that autocratic leaders do, and Xi Jinping definitely is, although he's more rational than Putin, shows that they're not always rational from the perspective of the Western countries. They have their own logic. The war that Russia started is very detrimental for Russian country and very detrimental for Russian citizens and its economy, everything, but they started it anyways. And China watches very closely what is the outcome of the war in Ukraine will be, because that will determine China's actions in the future. If the West will let Putin eat Ukraine, they will do one thing. If they defend Ukraine, they will do completely other thing. Let's take a look at Ukraine. Do they really fight for territory, or is it bigger than that? Really, they fight for their freedom and for their dignity. Not only the territories occupied, there is massive number of war crimes going on in the occupied territories. Rapes of all genders and all ages, tortures of civilians and soldiers, murders, attacks by rockets of civilian buildings and civilian infrastructure, many, many others, kidnapping of children and indoctrinating thousands of children into hating Ukraine as a state and Ukrainian nation. At the same time, there is absolute dehumanization by Russians of Ukrainians going on. For 8 years, Russian TV says Ukrainians are Nazis, Ukrainians are Nazis, Ukrainians are Nazis. And everything, all the war crimes I just listed, Russians claim that's what Ukrainians do to ethnic Russians on the territory of Ukraine. So when the Russian soldier comes to Ukrainian territory, first he heard for 8 years that Ukrainians are Nazis, therefore their wives are the wives of the Nazis, their kids are the kids of the Nazis. Why treat them better than a dog? And on top of that, there is zero consequences from their commanding officer for any bad thing that they do to the Ukrainian citizens. So the war crimes really is an institutionalized approach that Russia treats Ukrainian population in the occupied territories. I want to show you one quick clip. This is Chris Christie. He's a Republican candidate, presidential candidate from the Republican Party. He just been in Ukraine last month, and this is what he has to say.
Are you sharing yet, Oxana?
No, she can't.
You don't see it?
No, sorry. Maybe we just don't hear it.
No.
Okay.
You may have to select share sound.
Yeah, let me read you that. So, but you saw the picture?
No, we were still just seeing your slide.
Okay, just a second. Do you see the
Okay.
picture now?
I can see it.
There's going to be very little the United States can do to combat that. want you to understand, I was just there, just last Friday. I went to the town of Busha. When the Russians invaded there, the mayor told me about one particular street where the Russian soldiers went into every house, pulled the men out, gouged out their eyes while they were alive, tied their hands behind their back and shot them in the head, and then went into the homes and raped the women who were there. They went to the St. Michael's Cathedral on the top of the hill in Busha. They killed 160 people, civilians, and buried them in a shallow grave behind that cathedral and ransacked the cathedral. And the mayor showed me a picture that a Reuters photographer had taken of a 10-year-old girl who was dead on the street, been shot by a Russian soldier. In her hand was her leash with her dead dog at the end of that leash. She was out walking her dog and was shot and killed by a Russian soldier. 19,000 children have been abducted from Ukraine by the Russian army, stolen from their families, and taken back to Russia to reprogram them to be anti-Ukraine. I met one of those mothers whose child was taken away from her. They don't know where their child is, if their child's dead or alive, being cared for or abused. This is the regime that Ukraine is fighting. This is not a territorial dispute, Governor DeSantis.
So you get the picture. Let me share the slides again. So massive, massive war crimes going on the Ukrainian territory. There are three ways the war could end. One is Ukraine wins, another one it loses, and then there's a third one, the conflict freezes. Really, the only outcome of this war should be that Ukraine wins. If it loses, the Ukraine is absorbed, Russia goes further west. If it freezes, it'll be exactly the same as losing, only slower. Russia will take this break to go back, remilitarize, and attack again. This already happened. In 2014, they taken Donbass and Crimea, and then 8 years later, look here, full-scale invasion. This is what Zelensky said. If Russia stops shooting, the war will end. If Ukraine stops shooting, Ukraine will end. Ukraine must win. Just another image and a short video. This is an attack from a rocket that hit a civilian apartment building. This is the city of Dnipropetrovsk. Dnipro is called now, January of this year. As you see, a full entrance completely collapsed. I have a cousin, by the way, living in the city, in an apartment building just like that. Over 20 people dead, over 70 injured. And shellings like that go every day. This is who Ukraine is fighting with. And I want to show another short video. It is an attack of administrative building. And this building is kind of like, think about it like Department of Finance in the city of Sacramento, downtown. As you can see, the cars are driving there and parked there with civilians. This was March last year. This is the city where my sister lives. And this is the outcome from nearby. Not a territorial dispute. This is what Russia is doing there in Ukraine. Can you see the slide okay?
Yep.
Going back to what it means to the world. Just a couple of citations. One from Anthony Blinken, the Secretary of State, and one from President Biden. Blinken spoke at Johns Hopkins University just last week, and he said this. We are at the end of the post-Cold War era. Decades of relative geopolitical stability have given way to an intensifying competition with authoritarian revisionist powers. Beijing's and Moscow's of the world try to rewrite or rip down the pillars of the multilateral system. One era is ending, a new one is beginning. And decisions that we make now will shape the future for decades to come. And this is what President Biden said just yesterday at the United Nations General Assembly. Certain principles of international systems are sacrosanct. Sovereignty, territorial integrity, human rights are the core tenets of the UN Charter, the pillars of peaceful relations among nations. Russia's price for peace is Ukraine's capitulation, Ukraine's territory, and Ukraine's children. Russia believes that the world will grow wary and allows Russia to brutalize Ukraine without consequence. But I ask you this. If we abandon the core principles of the United States to appease an aggressor, can any member state in this body feel confident that they are protected? If we allow Ukraine to be carved up, is the independence of any nation secure? The answer, respectively, is no. We have to stand up to this aggression today to deter any would-be aggressor tomorrow. And this is also what I heard from many politicians and diplomats and politologists, that you cannot deter aggressor with words. You cannot say, aye, you're doing a bad thing. You can only deter by showing you're willing to protect your values. How the war should end is easy. This is the G7 statement from last October. The territorial integrity of Ukraine should be protected. Ukraine must have ability to continue defending yourself. The Ukraine must be reconstructed, hopefully with Russian money, and Russia must answer for all the crimes it committed. This is a document signed by the G7 leaders last October. This is how the war must end. And finally, what can you do as a regular person? Well, two very easy things to do. Ukraine needs weapons. The more weapons they get, the faster this war will end. You can donate straight to Ukrainian army. That is the best thing you could do with your money. You can also vote in America for the pro-Ukrainian US politicians. There are many who say not a cent to Ukraine, but Ukraine matters. Ukraine has a direct consequence to the United States national security and prosperity. Please do your job to help Ukraine. Thank you.